Discussing the E2 process, which essentially is categorized into two main parts. There's the investment portion, which includes the setup of the business or the purchase of the business and making all the necessary expenses needed. And Attorney Chung has gone into great detail about that first part of the investment already. And then now there's the second part, which is once the investment is done, there's the submission of the E2 application. That's the second part of the E2 process. Attorney Chung, thank you so much for going into great detail about the investment portion. From there, what should an E2 investor expect once their investment is completed?
Yes, I'd be happy to explain. Once the applicant has reached that point of completing a qualifying investment and business setup or acquisition, he or she may then be ready to apply for the E2 investor visa, whether directly with the United States Embassy in the applicant's home country, or if the applicant is already in the United States in appropriate non-immigrant visa status, it's possible to apply for a change of status to E2 investor directly in the US. The two processes are very different, and there are pros and cons to each process. So that requires some evaluation to determine which is the appropriate process for each applicant. Once the application is submitted, typically the immigration authorities, U.S. Embassy, will take a period of time to review the documents. That period of time will vary depending on the embassy, depending on how busy they are, depending on their personnel resources. So it could range anywhere from 1 to 3 months, typically, in most cases. During COVID, it was all over the place, and it could stretch out far beyond that. But 1 to 3 months was a typical E2 document time that most embassies take in order to complete their review. And once they complete their review, they will either reach out to the applicant or the applicant's attorney to invite the applicant to schedule a visa interview appointment, or request additional documentation, depending on which scenario is appropriate. Well, if once the embassy is satisfied with the documentation through their initial review and invite the applicant to schedule an interview appointment, then the applicant would select the appointment usually through an online calendar, and then attend that interview with him or herself and any dependent family members. All family members need to attend the interview at the U.S. Embassy in person, typically. Some embassies will allow minor children under 14 to not have to attend the interview, but must be physically present in the home country on the day of the interview. And mom and dad would just bring the minor child under 14, his or her passport, birth certificate, photos to the interview with the mom and dad. Then usually at the conclusion of the interview, the majority of cases will receive a decision, either an approval or a denial. Sometimes there might be a delay in decision where if the visa officer requests additional documentation, such as discovery during the interview questions of some additional documentation the officer would like to see before making a decision. Or sometimes another common reason for delay in decision is where the embassy official decides to conduct a background check on the applicant, him or herself, for security check or criminal records check, or do a verification check about the business to make sure the business is legitimate. That could delay the decision. But the great majority of the E2 cases do receive a decision on the interview date.
Speaking of the interview, let's go into a little bit about how we help our clients with preparing for their visa interview. But before we do that, I'd like to conclude this portion of the E2 process that we've just discussed, the submission of the E2 application. And Bobby, you just went into fantastic details about the submission of the E2 visa at the U.S. Embassy abroad in someone's country of home citizenship or in the country of legal residence. And you also mentioned there's a possibility of applying for the E2 application directly within the US as well. This is called a change of status that we've just discussed. For those who are already in the US and are eligible to do so, they can potentially submit their E2 application within the US, requesting for a change of status to E2. And this process does not require an interview at all. It's just submitting the relevant forms and documents to prove necessary for the E2 application and waiting for U.S. immigration to come back with a decision. And a decision can be a request for additional evidence, an approval, a denial, administrative processing. We do have a video on the difference and pros and cons of applying at the U.S. Embassy abroad versus within the U.S. Do take a look at that if you're considering two different processes of submission. And that about concludes the submission portion of the E2 process. Bobby, if you could go ahead and help conclude as well, what is it that we help our clients when it comes to preparing for their visa interview because they've submitted their application to a U.S. embassy abroad?
The E2 visa decision is based on two components. One is the documentation submitted demonstrating the qualifying investment in business. Second component is the applicant's performance at the interview. So being prepared to give a great performance interview and knowing what to expect and being ready to give thorough, meaningful answer in a confident way will significantly improve the applicant's probability of visa approval. Now, of course, the questions typically will be about what is your investment, what is the business, be ready to talk about that. But there are particular issues, whether it's investment, source of funds, business model, personal business qualifications. Some people have immigrant intent concerns. These are the type of issues that I help the client prepare and get ready to communicate properly and optimally to the visa officer and to maximize their chances getting that E2 visa approval.